Elves and fairies and werewolves, oh my. This is the 7th video in my World Building for Fantasy series, and you can find the rest of them in a playlist up in the cards. The purpose of this video series is to provide a jumping off point for beginner fantasy world builders and to give you ideas on how different world building elements can affect your stories. This is geared towards writers, especially novelists like myself. First is species versus races. When we're talking about different kinds of people in our fantasy world, we usually call them different races. Humans, elves, fairies, and so on. But sometimes we call them different species instead. Some will say that if they're compatible to produce offspring with each other, they're considered the same species. Others will say they have to have similar genetic origins to be considered the same species. But just figure out what sounds right for you and your world building, and that really should be all you need. Next is reproduction. No, this is not a science class lesson. When you're building multiple fantasy races for your world, it might be helpful to consider which ones can reproduce with the others. I'd really recommend figuring this out kind of early on in your world building because it could drastically change the makeup of your population. This can change the population in certain regions or the entire world, and it could even influence which characters you focus the story on. This can also coincide with your geography world building. If you already have the different places of origin for your different people figured out, this can help you decide how various populations of people have moved around over time. And depending on what point in your world's history you're writing in, maybe a human-elf hybrid could be a super rare person, or they could be a totally common part of every single city that's around your region. And if there are any possibilities for hybrids, does that come with any dangers or different powers? Does that make children have special powers, or do they have a higher possibility of having no magic at all? And of course, the other side of this is figuring out if their reproduction is any different than humans. Like if they're mer people, they might lay eggs, and if they are the long-lived elves, they might have a really long gestational time compared to humans. Next is origins and history. Consider where the original population is from. Is there any reason they originated here? And do they have any magical connection to this area? And where are the major places that they reside now? Do they still only live in a few select colonies, or are they pretty widespread throughout your world? And what is their population size like? If they only reside in a small region, they're probably more likely to have a smaller population. This will also depend on how long they live and how fast they reproduce. If the elves live a really long time, they probably spend many years growing one baby. So their population is most likely going to be a lot smaller than the humans or other people of your world. Do they have any conflicts with others or even within themselves? What's their relationship like with the other people of your world, and do they have any major enemies? Are there any factions or opposing parties within their society itself? Were there any major historical events that changed them or their culture? This could be things like a great war, the destruction of their home city, a disease, something like that. Next is magic. In some worlds, everyone who has magic has the same kind of magic, but in others it's different. One of the next videos in this series is going to be about magic systems, so do stay tuned for that. I will have it linked up in the playlist if it's up already. First, how is their magic different from the other species in your world? Is it elemental based while the others are spell based, or does it come from a different source? And why do they have it and others don't? Is it because their ancestors discovered a magical artifact and everyone who touched it passed abilities down to their children and so on? Or are they simply the only ones whose physiology can harness the power of these magical crystals? How do they use their magic in their everyday life? You can think about how they'd use it to make their own lives easier. Do they use it to light fires or to travel faster or maybe even to do their laundry? And does it affect their relationship with the other people of your world? Do the humans fear their magic? Or maybe the merchants really prefer to trade with them because they grow so much better crops. Next is features. Is there anything that makes them obviously part of one group or another, or are the differences between your races really subtle? This can be used in cases where characters need to blend into a crowd or infiltrate an enemy camp without being recognized. I'd take into consideration things like average height, eye colors, shape, wingspan, tail patterns, etc. So what are their biggest strengths? Can the mer people breathe underwater? Are the dwarves more cold-hardy than most? And with that, can any of their strengths actually be weaknesses when turned around? Maybe the mer people can breathe underwater, but they can't survive outside of saltwater. And what are their non-magical abilities? Do they have a better sense of smell than humans? Can they see in the dark? Do they need less sleep because of their physiology? Next is genetics. If they're a magical species, how are power or abilities passed down from parents to children? Is it totally random which kids get magic and which ones don't? Or does what they get have to do with a combination of the parents' abilities? Are people with two different abilities more likely to produce a magically stronger child? If so, that might affect the way that people choose spouses or partners. And as for their different physical traits, which traits are dominant? Do two carriers of a special power have a chance to have a child with that special power? Are there any common mutations or diseases that can be passed down? And lastly is customs. You might have things like clothing, taboos, traditions, depending on what things are important to their society. This could be coming of age ceremonies, marriage traditions, the celebration of birthdays, things like that. What traits do they find most beautiful? Which values are most commonly seen as very important to pass down to their children? The Klingons care about glory in battle and dying with honor. And the hobbits just want to have a good meal. Or 7. Of course, these are going to be generalizations, but you gotta start somewhere. To write a character who defies their own society, which is just kind of what main characters do, you first have to come up with the different things that they're going to be defying. Now, obviously, you don't have to have all these things figured out. These are just different ideas to help you build your world a little bit deeper in the areas you're most interested in. If you'd like to dive into the world of Alexia, you can check out Age of the Gods, which is a free short story I'll have linked down below. Alright, that's all I got for you, so thanks for watching. Bye!